the data strategy for demand creation. And I think this is really important for all of us doing marketing, using marketing automation, especially email marketing, anything in B2B marketing, because it's those data attributes that make such a huge difference in the results that we can see. And there can be issues that we don't even know are important, or we all know are very important. So I'd like to just tell you a little bit about ReachForce. We were founded in 2005 as a company to source precision contacts to help create a wider path to revenue so that there's more people for you to talk to that are specific to your business. We've expanded based on the needs of our customers to become a global data network for quality business demographic information data on over 220 million companies in North America, Europe, and the rest of the world. We have solutions for data cleansing and enrichment for both inbound and outbound campaigns that integrate with Marketo, Eloqua, Pardot, Silverpub, HubSpot, Salesforce, and we've worked with a lot of other CRMs and marketing automation systems, including Acton. We're currently serving over 400 customers, and we, believe it or not, love data. And one of the issues that we sort of lose sight of is that if we're not taking care of our data, it goes bad on us. And this is a typical 100,000 contact database, and we've assigned a dollar value so giving it a $100,000 value. You know that the actual cost of sourcing good contacts can range widely. If you get them at a trade show, it could have been a $50 to $100 acquisition cost. But what happens over the course of a year is that anywhere from 24 to 25%, I've seen figures as high as 30%, of your contacts are going to go bad, which means now your campaigns are only 76% deliverable. And also, when we get acquired lists, even from trade shows, and this happened to me recently, 2% of your, you can have up to 2% of your file that's spam traps. And if you hit one of those spam traps with outbound email, it is going to affect your sender score or your reputation as an email sender. And when you have a bad reputation as an email sender, it will affect further the deliverability of your email to your good contacts, which means that now something that potentially was delivering to 74,000 people is now only going to 49,000 people, depending on how bad your reputation is. So it takes time and effort and real money to fix that reputation. Additionally, for some marketing automation systems, it costs as much as 48 cents per lead to store it for a year. So there's an expensive carrying cost for those bad records and those kind of dark contacts. And there are email systems that never mark them as bad. They just receive all mail, so you'll never really know. So what's important to remember, though, is that cleaning your data, it does cost. It takes a little bit of time. But at the end of the day, you're going to see some real benefits. In addition to not having to give up the money that you would have lost, actually on my last slide, I think I pointed out, it's an $83,000 annual cost. It's $16,000 to replace bad contacts. It's $15,000 plus in ruined contact costs. And there we go, the $51,000 is to replace the contacts. But between your bad contacts and ruined contacts from mailing with a bad sender score, you're wasting that much money. But when you clean that asset to begin with and you get rid of the bad stuff at the beginning, that 74,000 names is 100% deliverable. And so now when you are mailing out, you're getting great deliverability, and you have the enriched targeting data to be able to speak to people and be more targeted in your messaging around their industry or their employee size or their revenues. And you may even get some email forwards out of that, which will help you to actually expand your list a little bit. So you've got zero duplicates, undeliverables, you're not hitting spam traps, and according to SiriusDecisions research, depending on your ASP and your sales cycle and a bunch of other variables, using our example, you're picking up $130,000 in additional revenue from mailing with a cleaner database. So baking back in the cost to clean it and the savings from what you would have lost for not cleaning it, it's $189,000 benefit to your business to keep your data clean every year. That's pretty important. So that's a little bit about why data is important to me, because data cleansing and enrichment is part of what we do here at ReachForce. And I'd like to just make this last point. Modern marketing can't function without great data. And for that reason, it's really important that there are smart guys in this world like Ross Graber, who is the research director for the Marketing Operations Strategies Service at SiriusDecisions, who studies this in detail and helps us all do a better job. He has over 15 years of practical, hands-on B2B marketing experience, and Ross works with clients to help them understand how to improve their marketing measurements, demonstrating marketing ROI, manage marketing data, and enhance their overall marketing marketing operation. And of course, you can follow Ross on the Twitter at Ross Graber.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Mary. And I appreciate everybody joining us today to listen and coming here to listen to a presentation on data strategy and demand. I'd like to start just by reiterating, I'm Ross Graber. I'm a research director within SiriusDecisions Marketing Operations Strategies practice. Now, if you're not familiar with SiriusDecisions, we're a research and advisory firm, and we're focused exclusively on issues surrounding B2B sales and marketing. This is our focus. This is what we do. Now, I'd like to start and just go over the agenda of what I'd like to cover today. I'm going to start off by talking about supporting demand creation objectives with data strategy. I'll also talk about aligning factors for prioritizing the investment that we make in data. And I'll talk about ways to provide visibility into the health and growth of our data. I'm hoping that at the end of our time today, you'll walk away with a view into some of the models that companies are using to help prioritize their investments in data. I also intend to share some perspective on how spend can be aligned across channels of demand investment as well as data investment. And I'm also going to share with you some best practice trends for approaching contact data. So that's what we're going to cover. And where I'd like to start is here with a view of the demand waterfall, because the topic we're covering today is how data strategy can support demand. So I wanted to start by talking a bit about how demand works. The demand waterfall looks at the process and the stages that leads go through as they progress toward becoming revenue. Now, one goal for this process is that we can make it into a predictable one with well understood conversion rates and outcomes. If we look all the way at the top of our picture, what we see are a list of marketing tactics. And at the top of our demand waterfall, what we expect to see are individuals represented by contacts who are registering inquiries with your company. So they're expressing their interest through a variety of ways. Perhaps they're responding to your email or your paid search ads. Maybe you're meeting them at events or some other marketing way. Some of these tactics that you're using are going to be based on your company knowing the individuals you're reaching. So these people will be folks who are in your database. Some other names will be for people who are not yet in your database, but you'd like to know them because you'd like to begin engaging with them. Now, at the top of our waterfall, inquiries serve to help us qualify an individual as marketers and get them to the point at which they're ready to be passed off to sales. In a B2B buying process, so what we see is that for the most part, individuals are registering multiple inquiries with an organization before they're deemed as marketing qualified or ready to be passed on to sales. Ultimately, once they qualify, they're taken through a buying process, and that will either result in wins, won business, or lost opportunities. But the reason why I want to start a presentation talking about data and demand is that I want to put the right context around the demand process itself. And this begins with the individuals at the very top who are going to become, who are represented by names in our database, and we hope that they're going to become inquiries. Now, for organizations with the right names registering inquiries, sitting in their data, so the right names in their database that are registering inquiries, this starts our process off on the right foot. So when we talk about filling the top of a waterfall with contacts, what we're talking about is the beginning of the process through which marketing-sourced revenue comes to our organizations. And it's important that we start by understanding what this process is and how data fits in. Best-in-class organizations tend to plan out the revenue that they're expected to source through their marketing efforts. They know what this means in terms of how many inquiries they need to generate and what sort of conversions they can expect to create all through the demand waterfall. Many can do modeling based around what their quantities are and how many names need to be driven from their databases. The important thing to remember here is that data, contact data, when done well, it's not really a scramble. It's not a question of, okay, let's run out and get the names that we need right now because we need them. It flows from an overall planning process, and that process has to be informed by our marketing priorities. Priorities tend to be established around the marketing segments that we intend to go after, and in organizations who do this really well, not only do we have a good view of the segments we're going after, but the buyer needs that we're looking to address, and hopefully these are needs that your company is going to be able to fill. When we start developing data strategy, it's important to start by thinking about what our overall marketing strategy is, and to begin with a formalized understanding around how demand is going to be driven and from what segments it's going to come from. In best-in-class companies, this is a planning process that starts 12 months out. High-performing organizations tend to operate this way. They set their priorities, and then they go and set what those data requirements need to be. When we talk about this, we start with priorities, and then we get to the data assessment stage in the picture, where this is really about going and looking at what we have already, because most organizations are not starting from zero. There is some level of contact data we have, but the question next becomes, how do we assess the suitability of our data against the task at hand? Now, in most organizations, what they typically find is the data is going to need work to go and meet its objectives or the things that the business wants of it. And what that means is that organizations are typically going to start establishing their investment requirements. What do they need to do to their data? How do they need to invest to get it into a stage where it can drive the level of demands that are necessary? Now, for organizations that do this assessment and find that their data is up to the task, they do have the right data, they have enough of it, it is going to support their demand requirement, that's great. But in most organizations, there's a process here, and we start looking at what sorts of investments can be made, how much investment needs to be made, do we have enough resources at hand to make that investment, or do we need to make shifts in how we go and target our segments or what our expectations tend to be. So this first slide is really an overview slide looking at the process that organizations tend to go through. Now, part of this process involves prioritization, and marketing prioritization tends not to be simple stuff. My previous slide wasn't intended to go and oversimplify things. Marketing balance tends to be difficult, and even more so in large, global, or multifaceted organizations. Balancing priorities across different dimensions should happen as part of our marketing planning process, and usually the group responsible for campaign planning needs to start providing those priorities as inputs. It's important to remember data is not the only thing that's not going to work well if our priorities and our areas of focus aren't well articulated. So on this particular slide, what we're doing is we're looking at the different dimensions or factors that organizations are usually prioritizing across. What you'll see is businesses will have to make choices about their level of focus on specific industries, specific buyer personas, how much energy or effort needs to be placed against one geography or another. They're balancing customers versus prospects, and they're balancing the needs of, they're balancing their data needs across different types of accounts or different account targets. What we see is that it's often a very different prospect or a very different requirement to address the needs in SMB segments versus what you might be looking at for your strategic accounts. This is really a basis for how you start thinking about the areas in which your data plans and your data investments need to be structured, and having this sort of background or prioritization along the dimensions that are important to your business, even if they're not ones appearing on the slide here, but that's going to drive your planning and where you put your resource. Most organizations will find it is not possible to put your resource in every single place. Resources are finite, and there's a large element of making choices about where we put them. Now, usually when I talk to marketing groups about contact data, the discussion goes down one of two paths. I'm sorry, when we're talking about how good one's contact data is, we see that it either goes down the lines of a question of quality. Do we have suitable quality of the records that we have? Or it goes down a path of coverage. Do we have enough of the right records? There's a balance here. We need to think not only of how good the data is that we have is, but also the degree to which the data we have covers the market that we need. Any reasonable planning exercise needs to start out with a measurement or an assessment of what our current data looks like. When we're talking about quality, that means how complete, valid, and fresh our current data may be. So this is a matter of saying, are our records full? Do we have the fields we require? Are the values showing up in those fields valid? Is this stuff recent or current enough for us to use and to support our marketing process? When it comes to coverage, that's a question of, do we have the segments that we need? Do we have enough of the contacts in the segments we require? Are the buyer personas that we have within these segments filled out well enough? Do we have enough of those? And how does this match up against, and how do the accounts match up against our account focus? We find that if we don't have, when marketers don't have enough of the right records, obviously their demand creation efforts are going to suffer. Put simply, without enough records, without enough contacts to reach, offers can't be sent to enough of the right people. And it's not likely that marketers are going to see the responses that they need at the top of the waterfall if they can't execute their outreach against the right numbers. If I'd put it differently, what we're saying is, without enough records, there's not enough fuel to go in at the top. And if that's the case, we can't succeed. I keep saying the right records, and I think that's a really key phrase here, because volume or mass alone, it doesn't do it. We might have the right quantities, but there's also a question of fit. And if the fit is not right, or if we don't know if the fit is right, we're going to lose out on our conversion rates. So whereas enough might be coming in at the top, lower offer acceptance or lower levels of qualification throughout our waterfall is going to lead to lower levels of conversion, and lower levels of conversion means less revenue. That's a place where perhaps we have enough of the right records, but without the right elements or the right quality of those records, we will see that our objectives become compromised. I wanted to quickly, as I spoke today, refer to a study that we had done at SiriusDecisions a couple of years back. And my goal here is not to take us through each data element showing up on the screen, but I wanted to make a point saying that we saw that organizations with strong data quality and strong data quality process were seeing improved demand performance by as much as 66% over organizations that may have just had typical or average levels of data quality. This is really a reinforcement of what I was speaking about on our last slide, where we're saying that better quality means better numbers of reachable names, but it also means that there can be better targeting and better conversion throughout the process. And what that means, or what that tends to mean anyway, is a better possibility, a better probability of creating the revenue that's desired and required. Now, estimating our coverage levels, or how much data we could have, doesn't need to be a difficult exercise, but it depends on developing a market size concept. So we can understand how our database looks, what its level of penetration is of the contacts we could have. So put differently, we want to look at the segments we care about, know what we have versus what's possible. And to do this, it becomes fairly simple back of napkin math. And let me talk about how that might work. For the segments that are important to us, to gain a concept of contact penetration, we want to start by estimating the number of companies that exist within our segment of focus. We also want to understand within each of these companies, how many different buyer roles are we targeting? Who are we going after? Who is it important for us to reach? Do we have an executive buyer? Perhaps we have a business owner, maybe there's a user. Whoever they are, it doesn't matter. It's just a matter of understanding. Well, it doesn't matter at this stage. It will matter later. But just understanding what those quantities are. And from there, being able to estimate how many people hold those roles within the organizations we're going after. Because what we're trying to do here is take the total number of companies in the segment, multiply that by the number of roles we go after and people holding those roles, and that should give us an estimate at least of how many individuals are out there in the market we're trying to reach. And what we want to be able to do is compare what we have in our database for that segment against what the total possibility is. And where this becomes really important is many organizations will find that they have to make priority decisions comparing the segments they're going after. And it helps to know if in one segment your penetration of the available contacts is 10%, while in another segment of equal priority, perhaps your penetration is 25%. It gives you another data point which you can use to drive your investment decisions, knowing how far you are from where you could be and being able to compare that to other segments that you're operating within. So I've been talking a bit about inquiries that show up at the top of a waterfall. And something that I pointed out a little bit earlier is that some of them originate from the marketing database. There are outbound tactics we engage in. We send communications to the people who are currently in our database, and we hope that we're going to get a response. But what's important to understand is that an increasing number of inquiries that we see our clients developing are not coming from people who may have been in the database already. So this is a shift. Companies are relying more and more upon their inbound efforts to build their databases. And this is really a significant development because what it's doing is not only is it opening up a different stream of tactics in a different way that we're acquiring names, but it's also distributing responsibility for name acquisition across functions. So it's not as if there's a database group here which is responsible for 100% of the name acquisition. we're seeing demand groups and operations groups or database groups sharing this responsibility. Now, one of the nice things that we're also seeing is that names that tend to come in through inbound channels are providing companies with contacts that tend to perform a little bit better. And what this means is we're looking at contacts that are more likely to accept additional offers from you. Because really what they've done is they've entered your line of sight by responding to an initial offer. Now, usually what will happen is it's easier to get individuals to respond to that next offer. They've responded to a previous offer as well. So what we're seeing is that these tend to be quite valuable. And many marketers have started arguing that names they discover through these methods are more valuable than the names that they may be acquiring through third-party sources. Now, what I wanted to do is just take a few seconds and talk about how we at SiriusDecisions define inbound marketing. I know it tends to be a very popular term in the marketplace today, and you might find that our definition is a little bit different than some others that you may be hearing. We look at inbound marketing as using marketing strategies to attract an audience. It means making an offer to an audience, but one that's not aimed at specific individuals. It's instead aimed at an audience of people who you don't know by name, but they're likely to fit the profiles that you're looking for. Often tactics like search engine marketing or SEM, banner advertising, or even content syndication are used by demand groups to generate these inbound inquiries. And these inbound inquiries also result in learning the names of people who can then be added to your database. We don't see the world as being either inbound or outbound. What we see instead is that different tactics, such as inbound, can add names to your database and prospects to buying cycles, but it tends to be a combination of inbound and outbound tactics that marketers use to go and generate increased interest and qualify individuals to the point where they can be sold to. Now, one of the things that I've been paying a lot of attention to are the shifts that inbound marketing is creating when we look at our approaches to data. One of the most significant pieces here when we talk about inbound is that inbound data normally arrives in bits and pieces. It's not like we're purchasing full contact records when we get names through inbound channels. And what you'll find is inbound marketers really they're not able to ask for all of the information they'd possibly desire in order to get somebody to complete a contact form. It's really a lot. So what tends to happen is inbound tactics or combinations of inbound tactics build upon the data that's initially provided, and as trust builds up, your buyers may provide more and more data to you. Now, the challenge here is that with less than complete or largely incomplete contact records, the data that comes in can be really difficult to categorize. There's also another reality that happens here where many marketers are finding that their inbound efforts are resulting in some really poorly suited contacts accepting their offers, turning up in their databases, and then something needs to be done to deal with them. What we're seeing marketers looking to create actions to further qualify, to further develop the right contact data. And in conjunction with this, we're seeing an increased emphasis and an increased spending, really, on marketers who are relying on data append services to support to support their efforts. And we're seeing this start to replace some of the emphasis that previously may have been on data acquisition. Put differently, people are enhancing the records that they have. Marketers are enhancing the records that they have and prioritizing that over acquiring additional records that they may need. And again, it's a question of priorities. It depends on where you stand. Now, some of this appending we're seeing is being built into forms. So it's happening right at the point where individuals are entering a certain amount of contact data about themselves into your forms, perhaps in response to a white paper offer. And some of this is happening after the fact. So the name lands in the database, and then marketers are taking them and sending those records out for appending. And what we're seeing is the more automated this process can be and the less overhead it requires to go and create this append and learn more about the individuals showing up in our database, the easier it tends to be for marketers and the more likely B2B marketers are to turn to these strategies.
I'm just going to throw a comment out. If I could pause, Ross. One of the latest technical hitch is every time I click a button, it disappears, so there's no question functionality showing up. If you could please tweet your questions to @ReachForce, we will take them in the last 10 minutes. Okay, anybody got your Twitter handy? @ReachForce, send your questions, please. Okay, thanks, Ross. Please carry on. This is really interesting.
Great. Okay, and I actually could I appreciated the moment to catch my breath. So what I was talking about is how data comes in bits and pieces more so than ever before. Now that inbound has become such a big part of how marketers are acquiring data. And what we've found is we need to take different strategies for assessing our database and the completeness of the records that sit within our database. And something that I've seen quite a bit of is that marketers tend to struggle with describing what they've actually got there. So we've developed, working with our clients, a categorization system or a hierarchy to talk about the different levels of data completeness. And this is going to come in really handy when we talk about measuring our database and understanding what's actually in there. We've broken up the model into 3 basic tiers, but you'll notice that there are 4 boxes on the screen. I'll start at the bottom, and the bottom box is labeled unreachable. There will be records in your database that you will determine are unreachable. They've not yet been purged. They're sitting there. We don't typically define them as being part of our database counts, but there needs to be a category to capture them and say, this is what we've got. We know that what we have here isn't going to let us perform outbound contact with these individuals, but they're there, and we have to figure out how to deal with these individuals in some way, shape, or form. But let's move on to the guts of this. The 3 levels of completeness that we look at have very simple names. We've defined levels called minimum, basic, and complete. And the way to think about this is at our minimum level or at our lowest level, what we've got is enough contact data that's going to support a basic outbound communication to an individual's reachable. Think about this as simply as perhaps this is an email address for somebody who wants your newsletter. You might not know their name, company, or their phone number, but you can fulfill what they've requested of you. But what we tend to see is that organizations are striving for something higher because we want to send intelligent communications to our contacts and increase the chances that they're going to respond favorably to our offers. So when we start looking at basic records, this is all about defining the elements that we need to support basic levels of segmentation. that we would like to be able to do so we can start targeting our offers on more than being able to say, yeah, they've requested an email from us. We're starting to match our most common or our most typical types of offers with the level of data completeness that's required to make that so. And in some companies, the definition may be, okay, we need the person's name, we need a company name, we need to understand their industry, and we have to have at least one way to do outreach. And that way of outreach might be a phone number as opposed to an email, but it's sufficient. And then the third level, or the most advanced level that we're talking about, we simply refer to as complete. Now, complete does not mean that we've filled out every possible data field that may exist in our marketing automation platform or our marketing database, but what it does mean is that we've acquired all of the necessary elements that will support the different ways that we communicate and the most complete level of segmentation that our communications require. So if we need to understand what some of their business needs may be, we will have some notation that we get that. This really is not meant to be a prescriptive list of which data elements you must have at a particular level, but instead what we're encouraging organizations to do is to define what is required at each level and what works for them, because it doesn't help anyone except the database owner to say 70% of our names have this field and 60% of our names have that field. We're trying to get a summary view of the relative state of quality that our database sits in. And I wanted to advance to this next model, which probably puts a cleaner view on this. What you'll see is something we call our active database profile. And along the left-hand side of this image or of this screen, what you'll see are our tiers of profile completeness. You'll also see along the bottom a scale. You'll see the word engagement, because we tend to look at the quality of our database along these two lines. Are our profiles complete? Are the people that it represents well engaged? Excuse me. Engagement is a question that we answer by saying, have we gotten activity from the individual? Have we seen activity from the individual who this profile represents within the last 12 months? Is the time frame perhaps longer than 12 months? In our model, we look at frames of 12 to 36 months. And are these people who have not been engaged with us in greater than 36 months? And in our view, we tend to look at those records as being inactive records for us. And I'll talk a little bit about why. Mary was talking about this at the start, but one of the things that we see is that data tends to deteriorate, whether just as a natural course of things. If you think about the fact that people change jobs, companies open and close, the individuals which correspond to your data records are in a certain state of flux. And we estimate that number at being about 30% per year. So regardless of what you do, if you did nothing, 30% of your data would go bad by the end of this year. So it stands to reason, if you've done nothing or if you've heard nothing over a 36-month period, chances are something's happened there. Now, this is just a basic model for understanding what we've got, but by looking at our data in this way, it helps us figure out how we want to target our investment. Are we better served taking active contacts where we might have a minimum level of completeness and enhancing those profiles, or are we better served by increasing our level of engagement with people with perhaps more complete records but haven't been as engaged recently with us? These are all priority decisions that this type of view allows us to make, and we see clients looking at this particular view or this particular reporting picture by market segment and by personas. Now, as we move forward, want to just say a word about planning, because I think planning here is such an important element. And it doesn't only go for data, it's something that is consistently critical across our marketing efforts. Although when we talk about data acquisition spend and data development spend, we find that spend is most impactful or most important when it's the result of a planned, proactive campaign approach. We know and we've seen repeatedly that single-use data or data that's not well integrated into your larger marketing approach is a waste of resource. One touch and done contact data doesn't work, certainly not in B2B. For data to work well for you, for contact data to work well, it has to be well integrated into comprehensive campaign planning. And this includes not only initial use, but consistent reuse. And what I typically advise marketers to do as they're thinking about acquiring data is acquire the data that they're prepared to use consistently and serially. Because what we find is when you buy data for one use or for single use and don't have the next approach or the next step or the next piece of a nurture in place, the data tends to go stale and it loses its value. This stuff can't sit around. As I've been talking, one of the points that I keep making is it's important to have the right contacts. And one of the most important developments that I'm seeing is that marketers are starting to take their understanding of their buyers, and not only are they developing those buyers into buyer personas, but they're starting to match those buyer personas into well-defined views of what they look like in their database. Early on, we saw that personas were being developed, and they were kind of conceptual. And marketers weren't doing as good as they could in turning those concepts of what a buyer tends to look like into what the data elements have to be to go and tell the organization that they've gotten a positive match. The way we look at this is that buyer personas, certainly as they exist in the database, are based on explicit factors and implicit factors. So when we're talking about the explicit factors, we're talking about the traditional and somewhat static profile information that we see around what is our buyer role, what is their function, what is their industry, perhaps what is their company size. And this stuff for an individual contact, it remains somewhat constant. But when we look at the implicit elements, these are really the things that, one, they're more situational or more temporary, but these are the behaviors that give us an indication of what a buyer's needs may be. And maybe we can assert what their needs are based on their patterns of content consumption upon our website. Now, both pieces of this, both explicit and implicit factors, go in to understanding that we've reached a persona. Now, it's important once we've reached them to have a good understanding of what they look like and that we're ready to go and extend the right offers to them where it's important to send them out, possibly for a pending so we can know more. But again, one of the points that I really want to hit home on is we need to consistently use the data that we have to keep it fresh, to keep it good, but also to keep the person on the other end of that contact record engaged. Now, I see that we're running up against the top of the hour, and I just wanted to share some closing recommendations with you. One of the most important things that I can share is it's really important to think about data, about our contact data, in the context of what it needs to be doing for our organization. And that means understanding how it factors into our demand requirements, what we need, how much of it, what the right ones look like. It's part of that entire process, and we need to look at it in that light. I'd also say be very aware of your needs for shifting some of your approaches in response to what inbound marketing can do to you. We're seeing and we're recommending a continued shift in dollars toward append services over net new contact acquisition. In conjunction with that, we're also recommending that marketers start to measure and value their engaged contacts over simply being able to report and feedback on the quantities that they have. I'll say again, continue to model your demand requirements and work those backwards to understand what your data needs are. And I'm recommending wholeheartedly that we need to extend our buyer personas and establish what those mean and what those look like within our database. Continue to work on planning. Planning is what drives this all, and utilize your campaign planning and be proactive about it to go and drive and direct the needs that you have for data. And ensure that your programs are consistent and continuous, so as you go, you're able to constantly, continually utilize the data that you've put such a great investment in up until this point. Now, at this point, I want to thank you for your attention as we've gone through. I appreciate you attending today, and I will turn it back over to Mary, who I know has been collecting questions, because I see that we have some time.
Yeah, please don't share the screen with me because I'm afraid what would happen after what we've been through today. I do have a couple questions. I actually sent a note out through chat asking if everyone could see your slides, and no one answered me, so I don't know if chat is working for everyone. So it's been an interesting day. But I do have some questions, which I think are the kinds of questions that I hear a lot about data. I'm going to be presenting a data strategy presentation at the Marketo Summit, so I hope I'll meet you there or at the sponsor pavilion where ReachForce is going to be exhibiting, because some of you have mentioned you're going to be there. And I guess a question that came to my mind in listening to you about data going stale is, what have you seen with your clients is the optimum email frequency to keep the database engaged, especially when they haven't progressed to a deeper part of the funnel, but they're the right sorts of people, they're just maybe not in buying mode yet?
Oh, that's a great question, and I wish I had a great answer for you. We're seeing different strategies being taken, and I think some of it is based on the types of behaviors that our clients are seeing back from the people that they're engaging with. I know that my colleagues over in SiriusDecisions Demand Creation Strategies service are seeing clients go and target at least monthly for the types, for what their frequency should be, but it tends to vary, and what you're going to see is that based on the types of responses you get as well as the unsubscribes that you get, you'll be able to adjust what that looks like. I don't think this is a one-size-fits-all, but what I would say is that if we're starting to get out to quarterly and biannually, that can be pretty infrequent. We're not sure that we've got evidence at that point that somebody exists.
So what would you say is
continues to exist?
Right. What would you say is the highest frequency that you've seen people using in B2B that didn't actually distress the list?
You know what? I don't know that I can answer that one.
Okay. Because nobody's hit it yet.
Well, we've seen distressed lists.
Yes.
The question is where do you go and draw that line? And I think that's a matter of it. It really depends. It's going to depend on the value of the offers that you're sending, how well the recipient is perceiving those offers, and whether it's being looked at as an annoyance or something that is helpful and informational. So it is more than just frequency.
And are you seeing a shift in the sort of content asset mix that people are using as promotional tools? I mean, clearly this webinar was an opportunity to engage with our potential customers and hopefully educate them along with me. But we have webinars, we have white papers, ebooks, infographics, slide shares. What are you seeing? Maybe an up and coming type of offer that's getting good response that we might not be aware of, and what's one that's sort of going by the wayside, maybe as it doesn't have the same effectiveness?
What we're seeing marketers do is we're seeing a lot more focus on matching the particular offers with the particular offers and delivery mechanisms with different personas. So persona research can tell us what the different consumption patterns may be for, let's say, our chief sales officer versus a purchasing manager versus somebody else who's embedded in the business. And while I don't know that I've seen tactically that it's one thing versus another, we do have research that shows different types of buyer personas are tending towards or gravitating towards different types of delivery mechanisms to consume their concept. To consume their content. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but where marketers are starting is just with a basic understanding of what their personas tend to consume, and then testing that out against what they're able to deliver and seeing where they're getting the greatest response and the greatest engagement and doing more of that. I can share, which I think most people still on the line are going to find interesting, is that we are seeing budgets continue to shift towards inbound tactics over some of the more traditional outbound tactics. Now, it doesn't mean that outbound outreach is going away, by no means, but we are seeing budgets start shifting, and we're seeing a lot more energy being invested, time, money, and energy being invested in content development.
And then what are you seeing as far as the challenges that people are facing with marketing automation and making the transition? I know that, for me, with our marketing automation, my biggest struggle as a marketing director is actually finding people that are already talented at using the tool. Is that something that a lot of marketing groups are seeing as a problem?
Absolutely. There are two things that we hear over and over again. One of them, and it ties in very nicely with the topic of this webinar, is data. The first thing we hear is that once people go from a non-marketing automation environment to a marketing automation environment, is they had no idea how bad their data was until they started using it for a much more segmented purpose, and that tends to hurt. The other thing that we hear is the skill level or the availability of skilled staff to come in and do this work. I mean, just the quantity of people who are able to do this is not in line with the amount of need that businesses are expressing for skilled people to do it. So it's a huge gap that we see starting. We can see it closing in the next few years, but it's not something that we see closing in the next year or two.
Yeah. Well, Ross, I want to thank you so much for coming along today, and for everyone on the call for your patience in dealing with really probably the largest set of completely different technical problems with a webinar I've ever experienced. I'm glad to claim the record for that. So we will be posting a recording of this, and I'll be sending out an operational email, which you will receive to let everyone know that there is a recording, because I know that I was getting emailed during the presentation. There was people having difficulty logging in. For the 99 of you that were also presenting along with me and Ross, thank you for being here. Sorry we couldn't get to your presentation. And if you want to know more about ReachForce, just come to the website or shoot me an email, or I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible at the Marketo Summit. And thanks so much for coming today. And that's it. Good night.
Thank you very much, Mary. Take care to everybody. Bye-bye.